Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming along today for our webinar on how to write a strong application to the Community Ownership Fund. You're all very welcome. Just from the outset, I'll just let you know that the recording, anybody who's registered here today will receive a copy of the recording, and you'll also get a copy of the slides. So Locality will send that out to you. It may take about a week or so. So you will get the slides and everything. So just to say that from the outset. So I'm Margaret Craig, and I'm the Senior Programme Coordinator with DTNI and Project Manager for the Community Ownership Fund. And we're joined today by Deirdre Fitzpatrick, who will be hosting the session. This is our second session on how to write a strong community application form. So if anybody was at the first session, this is kind of like a repeat of that, but I'm sure you'll take something else away from today, you know, and please ask questions because we're a smaller group this time. I think there's about 25 of us today, whereas the last time I think we had closer to 90. So smaller group, so, you know, feel free to ask questions. So just briefly about DTNI. DTNI, we're a membership organisation and we support the community voluntary sector to help them to acquire assets to retain wealth within their local communities. And that's kind of us in a nutshell. It's very brief on what we do. So we'll just put the slides up, Deirdre. Can we put the slides up and we'll just begin the session?
Yeah. Oh.
Just wondered, should everybody turn their cameras off just in case the bandwidth here, unless you really want to keep your camera on and you'll be sort of recorded, but it would be great. Maybe help just in case. Yeah, great. Okay, Deirdre, will we just go to the second slide?
Just going to put it on the slideshow here. Is that okay? Can you everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so this is just giving you an overview of what we're going to cover in the next hour and a half or so. So we'll give you an overview of the Community Ownership Fund and the support programme available, an overview of due diligence and eligibility for the fund, understanding of the scoring of applications, understanding what is required to submit a strong strategic case, understanding of what's required to submit a strong management case, and looking at what evidence that you'll need to support your application. So what is the Community Ownership Fund? So very briefly, it's a £150 million fund, and it's there to help local communities across the UK to take control of assets, amenities or facilities that are at risk of loss without community intervention. So that loss could be risk of closure, risk of sale, neglect, dereliction under the current ownership, energy inefficiency that threatens the long-term sustainable operations of the asset, and a non-sustainable current business model.
Oh, I skipped one, sorry. Sorry, can I just put in and say that should say round 3 and not round 4 at the top? I've just realised my mistake on that.
Okay, I was going to say we're in round 3. Yeah, okay, yeah. So we're in round 3 of the fund, and so far the Community Ownership Fund has funded 14 projects across Northern Ireland at a total value of around £3 million. So it's quite a substantial investment through this fund in Northern Ireland. And the fund is open to 2025, and we've quite a lot of expressions of interest at the minute. I think we're sitting with at least about 120 expressions of interest from across Northern Ireland. So it's quite a competitive fund. So you can apply for up to £250,000 to purchase or lease a local asset or to help to pay for refurbishments. So that's the kind of common amount that groups are applying for. You can apply for more because they have increased the cap. And I know it says there are 1 million, but in the last round, they actually increased that cap up to £2 million. So any group that would be applying for more than £250,000, they will be pushed into a different category. So they're going to have to provide a lot of evidence as to why their project is more exceptional than any other project that's only applying for the 250,000. So if you are applying for more than the 250, bear that in mind. So you're going to have to demonstrate that you've got a wider reach, that it's an essential asset to the community, etc., etc. So any amount that you apply for has to be matched, and it has to be matched up to 20% of the amount that you're applying for. So if you're applying for the 250, you need to have £50,000 of match funding. And there's also a revenue aspect to the funding as well. So in addition to the 250,000 plus your own 50, there would be £50,000 of revenue funding. So you could use that for salaries, you could use that for to bring in professional services, project manager, etc., etc. So how to apply. So the first stage is to go on and put in an expression of interest. So it's a very simple form. There's a number of questions on it, and that's really just to sift the application. So DLUG will go through those EOIs, and if you meet the basic criteria, you'll be moved into the next step, and the next step is to apply for the actual fund, to fill in the application. So once you pass the EOI stage, you'll receive a unique application link, and with that you'll be given a number, and you use that number for the duration of your application. So groups only need to submit the EOI once. So once you pass the EOI stage, you don't have, even if your project changes slightly, you don't have to reapply at the EOI stage. You just keep that EOI number, that unique reference number, and use that to submit your application. So there's 4 rounds of funding per year. So we're in the second one for this year. Yeah. So we're round 3, bidding window 2, which opened on August, and it'll close in October. And then we think that the round after that will probably open sometime late December, maybe early January. We don't know. They don't give us the dates ahead of time. It's like just a revolving fund. So anybody who was successful in the last round, DLUG have written to them, and sorry, not who were successful, but the successful EOI. They have written to them, and they've all got their links, so they can apply in this next bidding window. If they're ready to go, the letter that you receive from DLUG tells you that this window is opened, and a lot of groups think that they have to put their application in this window. You don't. You can apply in whichever window you're ready to apply for. So if you're not ready for the 11th of October, you can hold back your application, and you can submit it in the next window, which we think will be sometime in December. But what I will caution is that if you are filling the online application in, and you're filling it in this window, and you decide not to apply until the next window, you will lose all that information. So there is a Word version. We have created a Word version of the application form, which is available on the My Community website. DTNI, if you don't have it, get in touch with us. We can send you out a copy of it. And my advice is to use that, fill that in, so you have that copy for yourself. And then it's just a matter of copy and pasting it into whichever window it is that you are going to apply in. So unsuccessful groups can reapply as many times as they want. So if you are on this today and you've already submitted your application and you were unsuccessful, you can resubmit. If you've just submitted one in the July window and you're waiting on the outcome, and your outcome isn't successful, you can submit again in the October window, or even hold back until the December window. So the programme, as I said before, is opened until March 2025. So, our advice to any groups that we've been working with is take your time, make sure you've got all the information that's required for the application, because there's quite a lot that you have to do. And once you feel that you're ready, you've got clear line of sight, then submit your application, because, it's it's the waste. If you waste all your time and then your application's unsuccessful, it can be very sort of demotivating, I suppose. Okay, Deirdre. So yeah, so DTNI, we're one of 10 community support organisations who's supporting the Community Ownership Fund. So we're working with our sister organisations in England, locality, DTAS in Scotland, and also DTAS in Wales. There's the Plunkett Foundation, Cooperatives UK, Shared Assets, Sporting Assets, AHF, and Compass. So all of us as organisations, we have a wealth of knowledge and experience. So, you know, if during the course of you filling in your application, there's something that we can't help with, we can draw on the expertise of any of these organisations. So say, for example, yours is a heritage building and there's some special aspect of your application that has to be taken into account, we can call in AHF and they can help support us to support you to get your application across the line. So that's who we are. Okay.
Oh, sorry, jump to.
And this is how we can support you. So there's a My Community website, which, you know, we can put the link in the chat. And on that website, there's a wealth of information, resources about what is the Community Ownership Fund. This is a repeat of a webinar that we did before. This webinar will be put up on that. There's other webinars that the support organisations are delivering. For example, we're proposing to do one around social value, and that will be around the 25th of September. AHF are doing one in the middle of September. So if you jump onto that website, there's a few other webinars there that's going to be happening over the next month. So those resources may help you with the application process. Also on the My Community website, there's an advice service. So if you have a question and say you phone DTNI, you can't get us, pop your question onto the advice service. We'll get a copy of that and then we can answer your question that way. And then the last thing is the in-depth support packages that would be available to some groups. So DTNI have been allocated a limited number of in-depth support packages. We have a process that we have to follow as to which group get those support packages. So if you think that you are in need of some support with your application, certainly get in contact with us and we'll help you through that process, because even if we can't help you through the support packages from COF, there's other ways in which DTNI can help to support you to get you ready for your application. Okay, and so once you submit your application, there's 2 assessment criteria. So you've got a strategic business case and or a strategic case, sorry, and a management case. So in your strategic case, you have to give evidence such as community use of your asset, what the benefits are of your asset, how you've engaged your local community, is there environmental sustainability within your project. In your management case, you need to demonstrate the breakdown of your funding, any financial risks and forecasts, any skills and resources that you have available to you. So that could be within your organisation, with your board, or if you work with volunteers, the skills of your volunteers, and representation, inclusiveness and integration. So that's like for Northern Ireland, our section 75, that you just comply with that. So Deirdre's going to go into this in a lot more detail, and that's what the webinar is going to be based around. So I'm not going to dwell on that slide at all. So we'll just move forward, Deirdre. And yeah, so these are just a few problems just to note just from the outset. So once you submit your project, once you hit send of your application, you can't change your project. That is the project that you will be assessed on. And if you're successful, that is the project that you have to deliver. So it'll only be under some really extreme circumstances that, you know, worst case scenario, if something really major happens, that, you know, go back to the funder, we'll have a conversation and then see if you can change it. But they're saying from the outset, what you submit is what your project is, and there's been no changes after that. Any cost that you've incurred before you submit your application, you will not be able to claim any of that back. You know, that won't be eligible. So I'm sure a lot of you on this call or this webinar has applied for funding before, and that's the usual. You can only apply for what's going forward, not what has gone in the past. DLUG may take legal charge of the building. Don't let that put you off. It's like all funders. They're not precious about this, we're told, and it's only 7 years. So if you have funding from another funder, say your local council or another government department, and that funding is, it says that they need to take legal charge, just let DLUG know, and DLUG are happy to take second in that list. So it's just something to be aware of, not something to scare you. And COF is subject to procurement rules, so that's just, we know that, you get your quotes and good governance, basically. Seek advice if your organisation may be subject to any legal action. I'm not sure, we haven't came across that yet, but it's there anyway. If any of those problems arise, let us know. And check if any of your directors have been disqualified. So again, it's back to the governance. Quite a few groups have fallen down on the governance. It's not that they don't have it, they don't have strong governance. It's just how they have submitted and how they've told the story around their governance. So, just be as open and as transparent as you can with your application from the start, and you should be okay. So that's me done. Has anybody any questions at this point before we hand over to Deirdre? I'm sure you maybe have more questions for Deirdre than at this stage. You just hit the hand tool, we'll be able to see. I can't see any questions. So Deirdre, I'm just going to pass over to you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Margaret.
Just before I go, just let you know that Charlie and I in the background, if you have any questions, just post them onto the chat and we'll try to answer them as we're going along. Okay, sorry Deirdre, over to you.
No, that's grand. Thank you, Margaret. And thanks everybody for attending. I just want to take you through the things that are being asked for in the application form, and just to give people an understanding of the amount of detail that's actually required under all of these parts and the evidence that's required, so that your application will be a strong application. For those who've seen the form before, it changed in round 3. Now this is the second wave of round 3, if I can call it that. And so if you've been looking at it for this wave, it's the same application, but if you're looking at it previously, it has changed to just being a strategic case and a management case now. And the slide that we had on earlier with that Margaret went through with the elements of the strategic case and the management case gave a breakdown of what the scoring and the weighting of the scores is for each of those. But you'll see that on the application form. You can have a copy of the recording of this. It'll be available online. And if anybody wants these slides afterwards, you're welcome to have them. So just as a reminder of what those are. So the 4 elements on the strategic case are going to be: what's the current use of the building at the moment? How much engagement and local support have you got? What are the benefits, particularly of it coming under community ownership, or what would be the cost of it being lost to community ownership? And then the whole environmental sustainability thing is important for a community ownership fund. Looking for what makes your application strong, what are the assessors really looking for, and importantly, what's the evidence that lies behind that? One of the things you'll find when you're filling in your application to community ownership fund is that there's a limit in terms of the amount of attachments that you can put on. There are 2 places where you can put in 5 megabyte attachments, and that's it, which can be quite difficult because a lot of stuff you need to put in, and we'll come to it later again when we talk about governance and that. There's quite a lot of stuff you need to put in, and you're going to want to put in evidence of, maybe condition reports that'll be important for providing evidence of where you are with your application, research that you've done, consultation work that you've done. Some of that you'll have to talk about, and other stuff you'll be able to attach. But there are limits to what you can attach, so be aware of that early on, that you can't just say, oh, I'll add my condition report, I'll add my research, I'll add this, I'll add that. Sometimes it's difficult, or you have to cut and paste out of documents, and do a snip tool and put it into a Word document to make it less bulky. So those things are a wee bit tricky sometimes. But the main thing is that the underlying evidence is there, and there's a way of actually telling them about the research that's been done and the community consultation work that has been done, because that's key to actually being successful as a community ownership fund. So in terms of current use, what they're asking for, they ask you about who in the community uses the asset or who has used it in the past if it's not currently being used, how losing the asset would affect or has already affected people in the community, why will it be lost without community intervention, and why the community will be better served with the asset being under community ownership. In other words, if it's something that's being owned by council, why would there be any reason for it to change to community? And that's one of the things to be, to be careful as well. If there are any statutory functions being that if the building was being transferred from council to you, if it was being used for any of the council activities that they should be doing anyway, that would go against you. So it has to genuinely be a community owned asset and a community run asset with community control, or with the control of your group. So in terms of what's needed, how will the amenity be used and accessed by the community? You need to know what, you need specific references, as I say here, to tangible community uses, evidence sources, how many people are going to come, what classes are you going to run in it, or what activities are you going to have, how many people are likely to use it, what sort of community participation has there been and will there continue to be. So there has to be real evidence of the community wanting this, of how much the community use it at the moment or will use it. And you have to, the strong connection then between the risk of loss and the impact this would have or has already had on members of the community. So you need to be strong in that. What would be the loss to the community if you either don't take on the building, or if or if it is closed and you don't reopen, or it's at risk of closing? So those things you need to have idea of numbers, because sometimes people will say, well, we don't really know yet what we'll do in it. Well, you need to think that through. There needs to be some sort of activity. You need to know what groups are going to use it. There has to be that community buy-in, and you do need to know it's going to be used and have evidence that it's going to be used, and not just an inkling that the community might like that building to be either brought into community use or kept in community use. So if it's something you've already been doing and you just need, and you've got a good plan, which I'm sure all of you have, if you want to bring a building into community use or keep it in community use, you'll have a plan. So it's about providing evidence of who will use that. And later on, we'll talk about letters of support that can be uploaded. In terms of current use, what do you need? If the risk of continued use is high, if the building is likely to be sold, community use then is going to be threatened, and you need to know if there are, so you can say, look, they're planning application in for this, or we know that we're well aware, been made aware by private developers that they want to do it, or a planning application, or the council have made you aware. And if that would be lost to the community, being lost to the community is the key focus of the community ownership fund. So and as mentioned earlier, the added value of community ownership. Why would it be better off in ownership of the community and not in private ownership or in public ownership? In terms of engagement and local support, what do they want? They want to know, how have you engaged with the community about your intention to take ownership of the asset, and how has that shaped your project plans? So that's where you need to be able to say there's evidence of strong community engagement, that you've held focus groups, that you've held public meetings, that you've talked to user groups, that there's actually been real engagement. And I'm sure all of you have done that. And if you need to get that, if you need to get out to the community, it's fine if you've got user groups that you can readily go to. But if you need to get out to bigger groups, there are ways of doing that. You can do a SurveyMonkey with groups. You can do SurveyMonkey with the public. You can access them in ways that might, in ways that will hopefully be that are not too time consuming, because all of this takes a lot of time. So there are ways of getting surveys out through other connections, through links and things, to get that sort of feedback. But most importantly, if you've got a group of users, several user groups, that you talk to them and that you have evidence of what they're going to actually use, how often they're actually going to use it. Is there any partnerships that you've formed and how they'll help the project to be successful? So if you have user groups on a steering committee, anything like that, that shows the partnership. It doesn't have to be a formal partnership. It can be something just that you work together on, or if there is a formal partnership, that's even better. How your project supports any wider local plans. For those who've done any business case work in the past, it's about how does it fit in with like council plans, community plans. You can keep it at a very local level if it's going to be a very local service that you've got. If it's going to serve a wider group, then it has to fit in with wider plans like government plans. So it's looking at that sort of contextual part of how you fit in with other plans like sporting plans or community plans that the council might have, or that the local government has. And then finally, the local support for your project. Now, I said earlier, you can attach letters of support, and there's a specific area on the application form for attaching those. Again, it's a 5 megabyte limit, but there are ways of making those smaller. So that's one of the main ways of proving the local support, but you also have to write about it and write about how that local support is there for the project. Some of this, you'll find it is probably a little bit repetitive in that I don't keep to my slides and I talk about the stuff in advance, but evidence of strong community engagement and how that shaped your project. Link that to your governance and your decision-making processes. In terms of the partnership bit earlier, you're saying if you've got partners on your steering committee, or you've got partners that you're working informally with, but they have a link to your governance and how your decision-making is done. That's really important. I think Margaret mentioned earlier, governance is huge for the Community Ownership Fund, and there have been applications that have been excellent applications that have been turned down in the past because the governance hasn't been clear enough in the application. And it isn't that it wasn't in place, it just wasn't clear enough in the application. You have to have different engagement channels and have evidence of having reached a wide base. Talk about how the partners will contribute to the success of your project. So in other words, that's about proving the community benefit. That's about proving that you're actually linking with lots of different parts of the community and different groups within the community, and how they will contribute. And again, linked with governance, how will they link in terms of decision making? And it's all about showing that you're actually representing the community and that you're providing something that the community really wants. And that's where there's tangible examples of how the partners will be involved in the project. And one project that we were involved in had a steering committee, and all user groups were on that. It wasn't the management board, but it was a steering committee. And then everybody had 2 places on that, and then decisions from that went forward for final ratification. So the engagement of your user groups is going to be really important. We sort of talked about the range of partners, the connections with other local plans, which is what I was talking about, local council, business or community-led plans, and that can be very local in nature if that's what's important. And then the partners, we sort of talked about that. In terms of benefits, what community benefits do you expect to deliver with this project? Sometimes it's hard to describe what the benefits are going to be, but they're looking for exactly what activities you're going to deliver and then how that would benefit the community. So it's not just a list of the activities, it's how it benefits the community. And in some cases, it's because there's nothing else there and you're filling a gap. So it's really important that, to explain why and what difference it makes. So they're the sort of questions that they ask. And what you actually need in terms of evidence, in terms of your response, is the list of project activities. The way in which the project would be delivered has to link to a clear set of proposed outcomes. You have to know what you want to achieve from the project. You can use examples on your evidence base from projects that you've used before or any research that you have done. And then you've got to link your evidence base to your plans. So a comprehensive explanation of proposed community benefits backed up by sources of evidence. Evidence is the key in this. What you actually need, that you've actually done your research and that the evidence is there in terms of why you've decided to do what you're going to do with the building or with the asset. They talk about demonstrating excellent ambition to achieve these benefits. So you have to know exactly what you want, that they want that they want it to be quite ambitious in terms of what you can achieve, but realistic, because you're gonna be evaluating it afterwards. But a link between what you're doing and how that's actually going to give you the outcomes that you want. The possible benefits outlined in the application form, they want, you know, a reference to that. How you're going to deliver how you're going to deliver the outcomes, that has to be very well developed. As I said, they want the benefits and the outcomes to be quite ambitious and high, but on the other hand, realistic. And again, evidence or data to demonstrate the potential of the project to deliver those outcomes. So there's no point in saying you're going to have 1,000 people through something where the room only holds 100, or there's no point in saying you're going to have 1,000 people through something if that's not the evidence that you know, that you can supply in terms of the level of interest in what you're doing. So be realistic, but show that within being realistic that you're being ambitious as well. The benefits have to be outlined in the application form. This is again how you'll deliver the outcomes. They have to be well developed. Scale of ambition has to be high but realistic, and then the evidence. You can use local data sets about the community to back up your response. What we mean by that is, you know, if you're showing that there are so many unemployed, but you're going to run something that links with those, if you can show the demographics in terms of you've got you know, you live in an area with a very young population, or a lot of school-age children or preschool-age children, or you live in an area where there's an aging population, and that's what you're trying, you know, you're providing services for, that it's actually backed up by the demographics. If you're saying, like, you know, in terms of access to services, that the deprivation indicators show that you've got very poor access to services, even if you're not in a deprived area, but the access to services, maybe because you're rural, and then, you know, so there's a link between what you want to supply and the evidence base of what the demographics of your area are. And then in terms of sustainability, what they ask for is how you've considered the environmental sustainability, how do plans for your building works address the issue, and does the project include action and leadership on climate change, which obviously is a big ask. And what you need then in terms of evidence for them is to demonstrate clearly environmental sustainability as part of your vision for how the asset or immediate or capital scheme will be managed. So you need to, you know, the project directly contributes to environmental sustainability goals with clear examples of track record, or with tangible examples of how your plan to address the environmental sustainability have been developed. In other words, you need to have something, and, you know, some of you might be saying, well, what have we got there? It might be that you're going to, you know, some of the you get sustainability points in terms of scoring if you're able to highlight any of the things that you're going to do. So I would suggest to you, you know, obviously if you're going to use the, you know, the green accreditation, then that's going to show that you're going to try to make your building work as environmentally sustainable as you can. If there are things you're going to do, if you're going to put solar panels on, if you're going to have you know, even using low energy halogen bulbs, even using anything that's sustainable, you know, you can work through it and think of anything that's sustainable. Additional insulation that will reduce the need for heating in the building, earth pumps for heating, any form of environmentally sustainable practices that you might have. Make sure that you put them all in there. Some of you, if it's a new build and you will have the opportunity to do something that's, you know, that is leading in environmental sustainability. For others, you're going to be working with a building that maybe isn't very environmentally sustainable, but you have to find ways to actually do as much as you possibly can in terms of getting points under environmental sustainability and meeting the threshold on that question. Management case then. Again, there are 4 elements to the management case, and I know Margaret showed you the slide earlier with the weighting for those. And, you know, take a look at that and be aware of how much what way the scoring works out for that. I can go back to that slide at the end, just in terms of a summary of what the weightings are. But as I said to you earlier, you can get a copy of these anyway. So 4 elements of the management case: the funding breakdown, the financial and risk forecasts, resources and skills, and the representation, inclusiveness and integration. So this is all about really, how you're going to run your project and making sure that you've got enough money for it, that there are other sources of funding, that you know what they're going to be, or you think you know what they're going to be, that you can spend your money within the time period for this project, and that you've got the governance in place and the reach out into the community. So we're going to look at what makes it strong, what's the assessor looking for, and again, what's the underlying information and documentation that you require. This is all in addition to a business plan that gets uploaded, and there is a format for the business plan which you'll see on the My Community website, or it'll tell you within the application form what all has to be covered within the business plan. So obviously it will link with this, and obviously the figures in that will match the figures in this. So sometimes I think it's easier to get the business plan done and use the figures from it to fill in this part of the application form. You don't have to do it in that order, but I just find that a little bit easier, in that you then have, if you've got your projections and things done, you've got the figures from that to pull forward into this part of the application form. So points to bear in mind: you can't go back during the assessment process. So they're going to assess what's in the application form, the business plan, and the attachments. And I said to you earlier, there are a limited number of attachments. That's the bit that can catch you out. So don't leave it late to complete your application and try to add your attachments. They can be a little bit tricky. They ask for examples, they ask for comparisons in terms of how you're going to do it, and research that show that your proposal is realistic. Provide explanations, because you know what you're talking about, but it's like everything. I feel like a teacher talking to somebody getting into an exam here, they'll only mark what's on your form. So, even though you know what you're doing, maybe get somebody else to read over your application to make sure that it actually makes sense to somebody who doesn't know what you're doing, because we get tied up in our own project so much that we understand what we mean, but somebody else maybe doesn't understand what you mean by that. Be consistent. If you're saying one thing in your finance, then say the same thing in the written part. And the assessment criteria and scoring matrix are set out in detail on the DLUC website. Margaret sort of said most of avoiding this. I think maybe I made. Yeah, projects can't be changed after submission, which Margaret has said to you. And anything that isn't eligible, if it's in before the deadline, they'll take a legal charge. Margaret has said all this to you. Subject to procurement rules. Seek advice if your organisation is subject to any legal actions at all, and check. Sorry, I moved that slide and Margaret already covered it. My fault there. Apologies for that. So in terms then of the actual management case, then they refer to the asset as the property that's going to be acquired and or refurbished. Capital income and expenditure to buy and the income and expenditure to buy and refurbish the asset. So any of the money for looking after the building is going to be capital. Revenue is the money for running the asset. They look for you to include a contingency. So basically, if there are unexpected costs, that there's some sort of contingency in there, which is actually good, because a lot of funders won't allow a contingency, and most projects require one or really need one. And then your cash flow is your money going in and out, and your liquidity is how much cash have you got available, because in most cases you have to spend and claim back. So the funding breakdown, then they're looking for how much they're looking to find out about the acquisition of the asset, the refurbishment of the asset, what's your match funding, and they're looking for a good amount of detail in all of that. So with regard to the acquiring the asset, they're looking for the agreed sale price or the transfer terms, because it might be that you're getting it transferred for very little, or it might be that you're getting a peppercorn rent or whatever on it, or a peppercorn lease. They're looking for an independent valuation. Now, this is important, and I know there's one group on here who are probably going to pay more for the land that they're buying than it would normally attract under market value. but that's okay. It's just that you can't apply for the higher amount under community ownership fund, so they will only pay market value. So there's an independent valuation carried out on something, but you're agreeing to pay more than that, you can only apply for your percentage up to 80% of the actual market value, not the value that you choose to pay. It doesn't mean you can't pay that value, it just means you can't apply to the community ownership fund for the higher amount. They're looking for the agreement to sell or transfer. Michael was asking about the lease. What way should it be? There needs, whatever way that is, there needs to be some agreement that you will, if the asset is not currently in your ownership, you have to have an agreed lease or an agreement that you will get the lease or that you will be able to buy the asset. And you need evidence of that. So if you're getting something transferred from public sector, from a council or whatever, you will need to have an agreement that they will set up a lease for you. It doesn't have to have happened, but there has to be the agreement that will happen and evidence of that. They need to know the timescale for acquiring it. When will that be available to you? When can you take it over? And if there are any issues that might affect the acquisition, so if there are any queries in ownership, if there's anything about the deeds of it, if there's anything about it not being a very clean cut, you need to tell them. There's no point in these issues arising later, or try and get it ironed out. Obviously, would be better before you actually start. In terms of refurbishment of the asset, you need to provide them with information, a detailed breakdown of the work that's going to be needed. And very often a condition report is very useful to show how that's going to be done, or to show what's actually needed in order for the building really to be fit for purpose. They want to know that the applicant understands the condition of the building, what's needed to make it fit for purpose, and that the funding is going to be enough to complete the work. So there's no point in them saying, right, we'll give you this amount of money if it's actually not going to be enough. Now, they don't have to be your only funder. So if there are other sources of funding, it's identifying who those other sources of funding are likely to be, even if it's not actually agreed. Also, in terms of the breakdown of the work and the detailed cost of the refurbishment work, you'll need to have details of any professional advice that you've taken. So they're going to be looking for you to have got a survey, architects, a quantity surveyor, depending on the scale of the refurbishment work. But you have to have taken some sort of professional advice. The money has got to be spent within 12 months. And it's usually paid in arrears, and that's one of the reasons that they want the milestones, they want the time scales for actually completing the work. And that's why when they talk about the cash flow, you need to be able to fund it and claim that back. Now, very often you'll be able to borrow the money if you've got the approval for the work, and they are easier to work with than a lot of other funders. So they're looking for you to actually know that. You might have to spend a bit of money, and it may be that you can apply for support towards that, but you might have to spend some money in terms of getting a condition report, in terms of knowing all of this and having a QS actually give you professional costs. How will the building work be managed? That's going to be really important as well. One of the things that you're going to find is if you're getting an asset transferred from council, that they will be keen to be involved in leading the refurbishment work, even if you have a lease on it. That's something to be aware of, because Community Ownership Fund want you to be the lead on the building work. So you need to be very careful of any wording in any leases that would come potentially from councils in particular on that. Community Ownership Fund want you to be leading the building work and managing the building work, and therefore showing that you have the skills base to manage it, or pay somebody to do that as an employee of yours, and therefore that has to be within the cash flow as well. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So the capital funding needs to be broken down into the cost of the acquisition and the cost of the refurbishment and the contingency. The revenue request, if you have a revenue request, has to be for specifics. For example, project managing the building work, kickstarting activity in the building, doing marketing for any new activities that are going to be, that type of thing can fall within the revenue funding. And therefore, what's your total request for funding from Community Ownership Fund? What's the total cost of the project, and what's the match funding required? As Margaret has said, within the limits, and it's usually 250,000, which means that you have to provide a 50,000. There are higher amounts available. They're much harder to get, but there are higher amounts available up to 2 million. But the total, which is for sporting projects, but the total cost of the project and the match funding required. So you have to have the match funding, but remember, if there's if there's a higher amount, then you have to show where the rest of the funding is going to come from, and that's how much funding is already secured and how much have you still to secure. So if there's still a lot of money to be secured, you need to identify where you think that money might come from, what other grant forms, what other applications you've got in, what the deadline is for those applications, when the decision is likely to be made, and it will be offered to you on the basis of that. And so timescales for securing the outstanding match funding are really, really important. So where will it come from? What's the deadline for that? And it might be that you've already got some of it secured, and in addition to the community ownership fund, and you can let them know that. So what makes strong application? Full costings with clear explanations, no issues with eligibility. So in other words, you've got the lease, there's no issues with that. All your match funding secured would be ideal. It's not always the case, but at least a clear route for securing it within the time frame for spending it. The project plan setting out milestones to spend within 12 months, because that is what they're looking for. I mean, that's what you're signing up to be able to spend the money within 12 months. Experience has shown that they've been fairly flexible with that, but as the fund runs out in 2025, we might find that there's less flexibility, because they need to know how much is actually going to be committed, because if you can't spend your money, they want to make sure that it goes back to somebody else. And then the purpose of your revenue request, clearly showing how the revenue funding relates to the business plan and how it relates to securing the future of the asset. So that might be, as I mentioned earlier, that somebody to actually coordinate things within the centre, but also the whole the revenue funding is really supposed to be for pre-opening. So project manager, things like that, and the marketing, and even systems for booking, those types of things still fall within revenue. So if there's software that you need for booking services and things like that, all of that falls within revenue costs, and you can apply for that. And there's up to 50,000 available if you're applying for 250,000. It's no more than 20% of your application, and up to 50,000, which is the maximum. So financial and risk forecasts, what are they asking for? They're asking for any completed or planned feasibility studies, feasibility into the success of the building and the actual building, any planned activities or services in the asset, which you will already have covered, to be honest, because that came up under the strategic case as well. What were the activities that you're going to offer? So you don't necessarily have to do cut and paste, but you will have to repeat some of it in terms of what you're going to do and why that's going to happen. So it'll be more a summarized version of what you might have put in earlier to prove that, and also showing that it fits within the building. Financial forecasts, so your income sources and your costs, and there has to be an evidence set of assumptions. And this is where I mentioned to you, you're going to have financial forecasts within your business plan. So it'll just be a summary of those that can go into this, and then you can reference your business plan, because your business plan goes in with the application. So you can reference it in terms of, assumptions that you're going to make as to what your income sources are, how much is likely to bring in, why you think that's realistic, and why you think your costs that you have put in are realistic. So if you've got something that's new, if you've got a building that you're already running, then you're going to have the evidence of how much it has cost to run that. If this is something new, you might want to benchmark it against another project. And there are lots of projects out there that will happily give you some of their running costs. And you can say, look, this is this is why we reckon this is how much it's going to cost to run this building, or we've done the research, or we've spoken to these people, and this is where these costs have come from. Then an explanation of the use and the need for the revenue funding, the community ownership revenue funding, which we've talked about, and what you use it for, a set of cash flow forecasts, and then the risks and mitigations. That's what they're asking for. So what do you need in terms of the underpinning documentation for that? You're going to need a 5-year cash flow forecast, a income and expenditure budgets for, as I say, for 5 years, cash flow forecast with detailed assumptions, which we mentioned, a sensitivity analysis, what happens if, and show like if the income goes down, are we operating literally on a knife edge, or if the income goes down, or electricity costs soar as they have done, and fuel costs soar as they have done, where do we stand on that? So some sort of sensitivity analysis to show how that's actually going to affect it if your assumptions aren't actually correct and things are more expensive, or you bring in less income than you had thought. Now, the risk register, the guidance says that should be updated throughout the project. But what you need at this stage is to show that you understand the risks and you're taking steps to actually deal with them. Financial risks, risks of the building project, but all of other risks, including managing the building. That's your risk register. Any figures that you use have got to have an explanation. If there's been a feasibility study or research on specific income streams, refer to those and quote them in the business plan and the application. You need a plan for operating the building. What would be your opening hours? What would your staffing be? And again, a lot of that will be in your business plan. But you also need to know who are your customers. How will you market to them? What's the competition for activities? And how have you arrived at your pricing? Just so that they can see that your revenue plans are actually realistic. So for the underpinning evidence, you need your feasibility of the building and your income streams. You need that operational plan. You need to know about your customers. What's the marketplace like out there? What's the competition? Or is there a big gap in services, which is why you're going to provide what you're going to provide? And is your pricing realistic? So if we can give you an example, if you have an asset that you're going to use for different purposes. If you say your community cafe is going to bring in so much, you need to have the assumptions. So you're going to say, for example, we reckon we'd start off with 10 customers a day and they'll spend £5, 20 days a month in quarter 1. That will rise to 20, 30, 40 by quarter 4. And then you might say, and over the next years, we maintain that. For your room hire again, how much are you going to charge? How is that going to rise quarter by quarter? Your managed workspace, how much of it are you going to let out? If you've got a contract, like a welfare rights contract, knowing that you have that, knowing that it's secured, and knowing that that money is secure, even if it's only for another year. If you've got money from reaching communities, when that's going to be paid into you, and whatever fundraising you would do on a normal basis, and how much you expect that community fundraising to bring in. In terms of your costs, what are your costs? Well, your caretaking and cleaning, how many hours at how much? What do you reckon your utilities are going to be, and where you got that from? So based on information from a similar building, and you might want to give a bit more detail that you have benchmarked against, what or whom you benchmark with. How much your supplies are going to be for your coffee, for your cafe, tutor costs, welfare rights staff, event costs. So that's the sort of level of details that they're looking for in the assumptions for your projections and for your budgets. In terms of the financial and risk forecasts, they're looking for a clear business plan with details of how your financial sustainability is going to be achieved, details about feasibility work, clarity on risks and mitigations. That's an important one. I've sort of glossed over the risks and mitigations, but that's an important one. I did say that they expect that you'll be changing those, but they're looking for a risk register. They're looking for you to have some sort of risk register and to know how you're going to mitigate risks. So you need to actually identify what the risks are and put mitigations in place and show that you've actually thought that through, because obviously that's going to be important. You have to have clear financial and cash flow forecasts. I say exhaustive details. They are looking for details, on all of the assumptions. Justification of any revenue requested, including any pre-acquisition revenue. So that's what I say about, if you have anything beforehand in terms of staffing costs or things like that, that you apply for those. and then a lot of detail on the planned activities and services. I think you'll already have had a lot of excellent detail on that within your strategic case. And I say some of that can be summarised and brought forward to this. In terms then of skills and resources, what they ask you about relevant experience of delivering similar projects, relevant project management expertise on your board or staff team, what roles are going to be required to manage the asset, what your governance and membership structures are, and who the members of your board are, including their role and their main responsibilities. So what you actually need to provide to them then are going to be, in terms of governance, board and structures, your board profiles, what their roles are, what their skill set is in terms of decision making, and also succession. So that if you have a board that's been there for a long time, how does that, what is the rollover? How do you get new members onto the board? And they actually look for that. How do you go about that? How do you have a succession plan in place to show that the board's effective? And they want you to show how decisions are actually made. In terms of experience of doing this type of project, for some of the groups, it will be your first time, but then you need to show that you have people on your board that you're bringing it, that are on the board or that you will bring onto your board, and you need a clear governance structure. In fact, you really need to have them on your board for going forward, to be able to have their board profile there, and to say that one of the roles that they would be undertaking is to help manage the project, or to oversee somebody that you might employ to undertake the project, to be your project manager. But you're going to need somebody at board level that has experience at this experience of capital build projects if you're going to apply for a grant from Community Ownership Fund. You need a track record of your own organisation and any senior team members that you might or might not have. And I'm conscious that some of you won't have a senior team as such, but again, if you don't, then there's a board there, and that's, or a management committee or whatever it is, and that's who's going to be responsible. And a track record, as I say, if it's not a track record of the organisation, then track record of some of your board members who will actually be supportive on this project and be involved. Your recruitment plans and your understanding of being an employer, you need to show your recruitment plans, and know what your responsibilities are, which you can show if you've already got other employees, but if you don't, to show that you know what your employer responsibilities are. Things like the paperwork and accounting then, you need all your policies and procedures to be in place, including those that you actually need to run when you've got the building up and running. If you're a legal entity, your submissions up to date must be up to date. So if they go on to a company's house, charity commission, etc., everything should be up to date there. And then with regard to systems, you need to show that you've got an understanding of the systems that you're going to need in place to run the building. Are they already in place, or do they need to be acquired? So do you need an accounting package? Do you need HR support, or HR package, or have you got those things already in place? So that sort of governance is actually important. The skills and resources part then, you need a strong awareness of management requirements for the building. As I've said, track record, evidence of skills of experience of managing a community project, strong evidence of well-functioning governance structure, including effective decision-making and succession planning. I can't overemphasize how important that is. As I said earlier, there's been groups turned down just because that wasn't made clear in their application. So your governance structure would be very important in terms of them having confidence in you actually bringing this project to fruition. Your recruitment plans should be well progressed. Now, obviously, you can't have recruitment plans for, say, for example, a project manager or staffing to run an event or to run something until you've got funding. But you can have plans for it. You can't have them. You can have plans. You can't have them implemented, but you can have plans for it, and you can know exactly who it is that you want in terms of recruitment. And then clear and consistent info on the makeup of your board, on how decisions are made, and evidence that your board functions effectively would be really important. And then we're getting there. representation, inclusiveness and integration. Firstly, what they ask for. They ask how the views of the local community would be taken into account in running the asset. Now, some of this links back, and then if I go through all of them, actually, how the local community would be involved in running it, not just their views taken into consideration, but how the local community will be involved. Two slightly different things, but really important. It's really looking at representation, inclusiveness and integration in the running of your asset once it's operational. There's other parts of the application, if you remember, when we looked at the strategic case, that already ask how the views of the community have shaped the project. So obviously there's a bit of overlap here, but important to show how they're going to be involved once this is up and running. How are you accountable to your community in terms of what you do with the asset, and how will it be accessible to the whole of the community? So that's what they ask for. What you need to provide then, what you require, is not only to have a diversity, equity and inclusion policy, but how you actually implement that in relation to all areas of work. So how you're actually going to involve the community. You have to show that you understand the whole diversity, equity and inclusion, and not only have a policy, but show how it actually relates to all of your work. You have to show it's been considered in developing plans. They want to understand the membership structure, whether it's open and inclusive, if there are any barriers that have been overcome, especially in relation to paid membership, so that if, so for example, if paid membership might rule some of the community out because, because of cost barriers, because it's going to be too expensive, how have you taken that into consideration, or have you got any schemes in place that help with that? So are any barriers to inclusiveness, what has been considered, and show that a policy has been put into action. So inclusiveness and integration, really important. Clarity on your membership structure, who can be a member, what's the cost of membership, any barriers to inclusiveness, really important to link that, that if you have, if your community is, all one religion, what have you done to reach, if your membership is all one religion, what have you done to reach out to others? Does your membership reflect the community that you live in? Again, come back to demographics that we talked about earlier. Do you represent that? The extent to which your board is representative of the community. So if you've got other groups using it, that you might want some of those on your board, and how you've dealt with any barriers that there might be to inclusiveness. So they're looking for, for information, all of that. What makes it strong? Information, evidence on accountability. You do report back to the community, that you maybe have a public meeting, that you really encourage the public to come to that you do an annual report, that you actually at a public meeting, that you actually present an end of year report. Examples of how you're rooted in the community, how you've got other organisations involved, how you're representative of the whole community, how the community be involved in running the asset. Sometimes that one can be tricky and can be a wee bit difficult unless your board is very representative of the community, and that's your justification on how the community are going to be involved in running the asset. A membership structure with no barriers, that you're proactive in seeking to increase your reach and making sure that everybody can take part and is willing to take part and is welcomed. And the awareness of the need to be inclusive in the delivery of the project and the use of the asset. So they're the main things. In terms then of what I would say are top tips for doing this: do your research, make sure you can back up all of the information that you use. You won't be able to attach a lot of things, but make sure you can back up any information that you use. Provide explanations. I said to you earlier, it might be obvious to you, but somebody who doesn't know your organisation or your area may not find it obvious. So make sure that everything's really clear and very well explained. And I suggested earlier, get somebody who doesn't know your project in detail to read it and to point out anything that they don't understand.